50 years ago, 23 fishermen left the port of Homestead, Florida, heading into the Everglades, then vanished without a trace, leaving their families shattered. The official report blamed alligators and swamp accidents, but with no bodies found and almost no clues, the investigation quickly hit a dead end. Yet, for years afterward, some families never gave up hope, clinging to the slim chance that their loved ones were still alive somewhere. Then one day, when a former FBI agent discovered forgotten files in an archive, he noticed a detail that had been deliberately overlooked, a detail that could change the entire case and shock the nation. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from and don't forget to hit subscribe. In 1975, 23 fishermen left the port of Homestead, Florida, rowing deep into the Everglades as they had for generations. They carried nets, spare fuel, ice, and food for a 3-day trip. Not one of them returned. A week later, their 14-meter wooden boat was found drifting in a remote waterway, its hull scarred with 37 rifle-caliber bullet holes, the cabin smashed, and the fishing nets torn to shreds. No bodies, no signs of a struggle, only dried bloodstains clinging to the wooden deck. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Service's official report was released quickly. The fishermen may have been attacked by alligators or disoriented and drowned in the swamp. The case file was closed in just 20 days, an unusual speed for the largest mass tragedy in Miami-Dade County history. Each family received a fixed $3,000 compensation, with no forensic investigation, no public trial. But what shook the people of Homestead was an article in the Miami Herald on August 12 that year. A reporter claimed to have seen a blood trail nearly 200 meters long, staining the water where the boat was found. This detail suggested a large-scale shooting had taken place. Yet, within less than 24 hours, all copies of the newspaper were recalled, the article vanished from archives, and the reporter abruptly quit and left Florida, never to return. For decades, the story was passed down through vague rumors, labeled an accident, and faded into obscurity. 30 years later, in the dusty basement of an old government building in Tallahassee, Michael Harrington, a retired FBI agent, was sifting through old case files to prepare them for digital archiving. Having worked on numerous investigations during the Cold War, his seasoned eyes immediately locked onto an unusually thick box labeled in bold red, "Swamp Fire, Restricted." Inside were not mundane administrative papers, but a map of the Everglades marked with 7 odd points, a list titled 23 Fishermen, eliminated with a faded signature, and a blurry photograph of men in gas masks standing next to an unmarked vessel. Michael's heart pounded. He knew he had stumbled upon a secret buried for 3 decades, a secret tied to the mass death of 23 innocent men, and possibly more. Michael, then 65, was a man shaped by both the harshness and the scars of nearly 40 years with the FBI. He had handled espionage cases, high-profile defections, and top-secret programs most Americans would never hear about. Among investigators, Harrington was known for his toughness, principles, and obsession with anomalies, dark corners, in reports that were stamped closed but still reeked of cover-ups. That obsession kept him glued to the file he'd just opened. Swamp Fire was no longer just a name on a red label. It became the gateway to the greatest mystery of his life. He flipped through the pages. The Everglades map sprawled across the table, its network of waterways like veins, with 7 black dots forming an arc around a remote southern area. Next to each dot were cryptic initials: Setawan, 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 Setawan. Michael frowned. He had investigated in the Everglades before, but had never seen an FBI map marked so mysteriously. He turned to a handwritten report, its scrawled but authoritative text chilling him. 23 fishermen eliminated, SF protocol. Not missing, not died in an accident, but eliminated. The cold phrasing cut into his memory of the 1975 disappearance, a case officially called an accident, but likely a deliberate purge. Michael continued examining the file. A faded yellowed photograph emerged from beneath a brown protective sheet. It showed soldiers in unmarked uniforms, wearing gas masks, standing beside a gray-painted vessel with no registration number, its structure clearly that of a military research ship used in experimental projects. The photographer had snapped it hastily, the angle off. But enough for Michael to recognize the setting. An Everglades waterway with reeds taller than a man. The figures in the photo stood motionless, as if guarding something on the ship. A chill ran through him. A grim thought crept in. If swamp fire was a biological weapons test, the 23 fishermen may have become victims simply for witnessing something they weren't meant to see. Michael recalled other strange disappearances from the Cold War he'd heard about. Scientists vanishing, pilots crashing, engineers declared dead in traffic accidents. They all shared a pattern, too quick, too clean, and no one dared ask more. He flipped to the file's final page, where a signature typically confirmed the report. His heart stopped. The name made him think he'd misread. Special Agent Thomas Reed. Michael dropped the paper, staring into space. Reed was no stranger. On the contrary, he was one of Michael's closest colleagues in the late 1960s. Reed had been a sharp investigator, but in 1977, 2 years after the fisherman's disappearance, he abruptly left the FBI. Personnel records stated voluntary resignation, but Michael knew it wasn't that simple. No one saw Reed afterward, no contact address, no explanation. In FBI hallways back then, whispers suggested Reed was transferred to a special Department of Defense project, but no proof existed. Now Reed's name appeared at the top of the swamp fire file, the person in charge, signing off on 23 fishermen, eliminated. Michael's throat went dry. If Reed truly oversaw swamp fire, not only was the government involved, but his former colleague was a key link in a mass murder conspiracy. He recalled their last meeting, a hurried dinner in Washington, where Reed spoke of things we do to keep America safe, with a cold smile. Back then, Michael didn't grasp the full meaning. Now he did. It tied directly to the Everglades, to 23 innocent men, and likely more. He closed the file box, heart racing, sweat beading on his forehead. One question echoed in his mind. What was Reed hiding by disappearing, and why did his trace linger in this classified document? Michael gripped the paper with Reed's signature, knowing that pursuing this path meant diving into a secret buried for over 30 years, and the mastermind might be the colleague he once shared a table with. Michael barely slept that night. He couldn't tear himself away from the swamp fire file, but he also wanted to verify everything against the official records still in storage. The next morning, he returned to the archive, surrounded by the smell of moldy paper and flickering neon lights. On a rusted shelf, he pulled out a thin file labeled Homestead Fisherman, 1975. Strangely, the largest mass tragedy in Miami-Dade County history was condensed into just a few pages. He spread the investigation report before him. The first line made him frown. 23 fishermen left Homestead Port at 4:30 a.m. on July 2, 1975, presumed missing between 11 a.m. and 13 p.m. that day. Just 2 hours? Michael knew it took at least 6 hours to row deep into the Everglades from Homestead. Why did the report claim they vanished mere hours after leaving port? The next timeline was even stranger. By 15 o'clock that afternoon, a search team was deployed, but witness statements claimed no boat was seen leaving that morning. Michael scanned each line, finding contradictions, as if the report was hastily written to close the case. He turned to the compensation documents. A stack of faded yellow papers showed each family received $3,000. Michael laid them side by side and immediately spotted something odd. All were signed on the same day, July 22, 1975. No time gap, no negotiation process. Worse, many signatures looked nearly identical, down to the stroke and slant. With years of FBI handwriting analysis experience, Michael was certain at least 9 were forged. This suggested the government had faked signatures to legitimize the payouts and seal the case for good. The deeper he dug, the thicker the web of lies grew. He reviewed the list of 23 victims. Some names were familiar: Cuban, Haitian, Italian families, immigrant communities who lived off fishing in Homestead. But when he cross-checked birth records in state databases, a shocking detail emerged. 3 names didn't exist in any birth certificates. No hospital records, no school registrations, no driver's licenses. In other words, at least 3 of the 23 fishermen might be ghosts, fabricated identities to cover something up. Michael sat frozen. If the 23 weren't just random victims, and some didn't even exist on paper, this story was far more complex. He opened the archive's old computer, searching remaining internal databases. One name popped up, stopping his heart. Raul Mendez, 34, listed as a Cuban fisherman. But when Michael entered the name into the FBI database, a classified file appeared. Raul Mendez had been an FBI informant in the early 1970s, feeding information on exiled Cuban armed groups in Miami. The file noted Mendez met Special Agent Thomas Reed at least 6 times in the 2 years before vanishing. Michael leaned back, a chill running down his spine. One of the 23 wasn't just a fisherman. He was an intelligence asset, an informant protected by the FBI, even assigned a code in the system. So why was he on that doomed boat in 1975? And why did the government rush to bury the case instead of saving a valuable source? Only one explanation made sense. Raul Mendez knew too much. He may have discovered swamp fire and became a threat to those who used him. Michael returned to the blurry swamp fire photos, particularly the one of masked special forces beside the unmarked gray ship. He zoomed in, squinting to see clearly. One figure's build looked familiar, strikingly like Reed. If it was Reed, it meant his former colleague wasn't just overseeing the file, but was at the scene. That explained why Reed vanished from the FBI 2 years later. He didn't resign. He was relocated to bury a crime. Michael's hands trembled as he gathered the papers. Each revelation opened a new branch of the mystery: contradictory timelines, forged compensation signatures, 3 victims with no birth records, and an FBI informant among the missing. He knew he was touching a viper's nest, but decades of experience taught him one thing: the more anomalies, the bigger the conspiracy. And if Reed was involved, this wasn't a swamp accident, it was deliberate murder, covered up by the very agencies Michael had served his entire life. He closed the file, eyes fixed on Raul Mendez's name. One haunting question echoed: were all 23 fishermen random victims? Or were they innocents dragged into silencing one man the government wanted, gone forever? Michael resolved to trace Raul Mendez's trail, and if any clue remained after 30 years, it would be the key to unlocking the secret called swamp fire. Michael knew that to follow Raul Mendez's trail, he couldn't just sit in an archive cross-referencing documents. Too much time had passed. Witnesses might be gone, records erased. The only path was to return to the starting point, the Everglades. It wasn't just a vast wetland, but a natural maze where light and shadow blended, where anything that happened could be swallowed forever. 30 years ago, 23 fishermen vanished there. Now, a retired FBI agent like him was venturing in alone, carrying more questions than answers. He drove to the edge of the swamp, to the old Homestead dock. The once paved road was cracked, overgrown with moss and weeds, looking abandoned from another era. The Everglades' dark water stretched before him, like a mirror reflecting a gray sky. Reeds taller than a man swayed in the wind, giving the sense of being watched. The hum of insects mixed with distant strange bird calls. Michael pulled his jacket tight, cold sweat trickling down his back. He was used to crime scenes. But the Everglades' deadly silence was more haunting than any interrogation room. Venturing deeper into the dock, he saw remnants from the 1970s, rotting wooden frames, rusted cables dangling. Then he froze before a bulky object hidden under reeds, an old container, its metal peeling, stained with red rust. Michael pried it open. The stench of rust and mold hit hard. Inside, dozens of military shell casings lay mixed with damp sand. He picked one up, turning it under faint light. The base stamp read clear, LC-74, a mark from Lake City Army ammunition plant in Missouri. Michael gripped the casing. Military ammunition at the site, where 23 fishermen vanished. This was no coincidence. He noted the location, took photos, and moved along the old dock. A decayed wooden boat lay overturned by the bank, nearly consumed by time and swamp water. Michael brushed moss off its hull with a stick, and his heart skipped. Gray-silver stains covered the wood, etched into unnatural grooves. He shone his flashlight close. These weren't natural marks. They were chemical traces, strong enough to corrode metal and wood. He recalled Cold War investigations of biological weapons. Many test liquids, stored in leaking containers, left such destructive stains. Once again, evidence pointed to what he suspected. Swamp fire wasn't an accident. It was a chemical biological test, so dangerous that everything tied to it had to be erased. Michael crouched, scraping a wood fragment with his knife. The surface flaked off, revealing a core eroded to fine powder. He bagged the sample. As he looked up, a gust bent the reeds. The already eerie atmosphere grew suffocating. He felt eyes on him. A faint buzzing sounded, soft at first, then clearer. Michael turned, heart racing. In the sky, a small black object hovered above him. He squinted, recognizing it as a drone. Civilian, but camera-equipped, tracking his every step. Its black lens faced him, a red light blinking. Michael stepped back, his heart tightening with a stark truth. Someone knew he was in the Everglades. He wasn't alone. Michael left the old dock with an eerie feeling still prickling his skin. The drone had vanished after a few minutes, but its shadow lingered heavily in his mind. Someone was watching, meaning someone was still protecting the swamp fire secret, 30 years after the 23 fishermen disappeared. He decided to pursue another lead, a name that had faintly surfaced in personnel records he'd unearthed years ago. James "Jimmy" Calhoun. Calhoun had been a Green Beret, serving in Vietnam in the late 1960s. Then abruptly left the military in 1974. No official discharge records, no post-military employment. Rumors said he vanished into the Everglades, living like a ghost among the swamps. Locals considered him a recluse, occasionally appearing at a small general store to buy salt, hunting ammo, and cheap whiskey before silently slipping back into the reeds. Michael spent nearly half a day asking around, following vague directions, until he stopped before a dilapidated wooden shack nestled among head-high reeds. He stepped onto the creaking porch and knocked. From inside came the sound of a shotgun being cocked. A hoarse, aged, but sharp voice called out, "Who's there?" Michael raised both hands, responding slowly. "My name is Michael Harrington. I used to be FBI. I want to talk to you, Jimmy." The door cracked open, revealing a white-haired, bearded man with wild but alert eyes. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his body aged but still exuding a soldier's toughness. In Jimmy's hands was an old shotgun, aimed straight out. "FBI? I buried that past long ago. Go back. I've got nothing to say." Michael took a deep breath, pulled the file from his coat, and held up the cover with its glaring red label. "Swamp Fire. You know this name, don't you?" The name cut through the air like a knife. Jimmy froze. His eyes flashed with anger mixed with fear. The shotgun lowered slightly. "Where'd you get that?" "Old government archive. It never disappeared, Jimmy. They just hid it." Jimmy stayed silent for a long moment, then opened the door wider, gesturing Michael inside. In the shack, reeking of gunpowder and damp wood, Michael saw an array of items. An Everglades map spread on a table, ammo boxes, a hunting knife, and a stack of worn notebooks. Jimmy slumped into a chair, poured whiskey into a glass, and downed it in one gulp. "I wasn't going to talk to anyone else. For 30 years, I've lived like a shadow because of that. But if you've tracked me down this far, maybe I can't stay silent forever." Michael nodded, opened the file, and showed Jimmy the blurry photos and the line, 23 fishermen eliminated. SF protocol. Jimmy closed his eyes tightly. Yeah, that night, I was there. He began to talk. In June 1975, Jimmy was called for a national security mission. They brought him and a small squad deep into the Everglades to guard a makeshift military facility built of wood and steel. At first, he thought it was a fuel depot, but then he saw refrigerated containers and scientists in white coats and gas masks coming and going daily. The base was miles from the main river, completely isolated, heavily guarded. The orders were clear: no one gets close. Intruders, deal with them immediately. I saw plenty of horrors in the war, Michael. But what happened there? It was a different kind of nightmare. They weren't testing weapons or guns. They were testing bacteria. Jimmy's voice trembled. One night in June, he saw a massive cage brought in, holding hundreds of migratory birds caught from the coast. Scientists sprayed a gray-brown mist onto the cage. At first, the birds screeched, flapping wildly. Then, one by one, they dropped, twitching, and within hours, the entire cage was a pile of dead birds. The next day, Jimmy was ordered to open the cage, letting the carcasses fall into the water to drift away. They said they wanted to see how fast the bacteria spread. I asked, "What about the locals?" An officer just laughed. "No one lives out here. And if a few natives die, no one will notice." Michael's stomach churned. He'd read classified reports on Cold War biological tests, but hearing it from a living witness was different. It carried the stench of blood and death, not just dry numbers. Jimmy took a breath, poured more whiskey. The night the 23 fishermen vanished, I wasn't at the firing position. But I heard the shots. Screams echoed across the water. Then silence. We were ordered to clean up the scene. I saw boats stained with blood and tied up body bags. They said, "This is an order from above. No one escapes." Michael sat stunned, gripping the file. He realized he'd touched a deeper layer of the secret. Swamp fire wasn't just the tragedy of 23 fishermen. It was a chain of inhumane experiments using the Everglades as an open-air lab. Outside the shack, Michael heard a familiar buzzing. He glanced through a crack in the door. A red light blinked from another drone, hovering by the porch, recording their conversation. Swamp fire wasn't just a ghost of the past. It was alive, and it had just noticed that Michael and Jimmy had spoken. In the rotting wooden shack, the oil lamp cast light on the deep lines etched into Jimmy Calhoun's face. Michael Harrington sat across from him, the swamp fire file on the table, but what he was about to hear was more haunting than any document. Jimmy took a drag on his cigarette, his trembling hands betraying a man revisiting an old wound. He sighed, his voice raspy. "I'll tell you about the night those 23 men disappeared, but once you hear it, you'll never sleep soundly again." Michael nodded, ready. He pulled out a notebook, but Jimmy raised a hand to stop him. "No need to write, you'll remember. What I'm about to say never fades from your mind." Jimmy closed his eyes, memory pulling him back to that June night in 1975. The base, deep in the pitch-black Everglades, was lit only by flashlights and a few torches along the bank. That night, Jimmy was on guard near Observation Post 3. About half a mile from the waterway, around 11 p.m., he heard a boat's engine. Odd, since fishermen rarely ventured there, especially at night. But 23 men in 5 wooden boats, loaded with nets and fish crates, had entered the restricted zone, unaware it was a classified area. Then I heard the warning siren, and after that, hell broke loose. Machine guns erupted, the rapid fire making the swamp water tremble. Jimmy recalled the acrid smell of gunpowder mixing with a chemical stench, a strange gas the soldiers had been ordered to spray on the water days earlier. Screams echoed, cries for help, splintering wood, boats, capsizing. He remembered one man shouting in Spanish, "Ayúdanos por favor," before being cut off by a sweeping burst of gunfire. Within minutes, the channel ran red. Jimmy, shaking, opened a rusted metal box from under the table, pulling out a small glass vial with a faded label. SF. The liquid inside was dark, viscous. "This is one of the biological samples they tested. I kept it as a reminder this was real." Michael stared at the vial, a mix of revulsion and dread washing over him. He'd heard of covert biological programs, but never imagined holding physical evidence like this. And this, Jimmy said, pulling out an old reel-to-reel tape, its spool worn but intact. I risked my life stealing this from the command room when they pulled out. He set up an old tape player, inserting the reel. As the machine whirred, Michael's spine chilled. The recording started with water, lapping hard against a boat's hull, wood creaking. Then came chaotic shouts, "God help us," followed by relentless gunfire. Not just machine guns, but pistols and rifles mixed in. Amid the chaos, a calm, deep male voice came over the radio, "Neutralize all, swamp fire must remain silent." The tape stopped, leaving a deafening silence. Michael clenched his fists. This order was undeniable proof. The disappearance of the 23 fishermen wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate execution. Jimmy stubbed out his cigarette, eyes red. I heard that order with my own ears, and I know who that voice belonged to. Michael looked up sharply. You know? Jimmy nodded, his voice choked. Reed. Special Agent Reed. Michael froze. Reed had been a close colleague at the FBI in the 1970s. A friend, a seasoned agent, who then mysteriously disappeared from records, listed as transferred to a special assignment. You're sure, Jimmy? I'll never forget that face. In 1975, Reed was at the waterway, wearing an unmarked uniform, a strange armband. I saw him standing by the commanding officer, giving the order to fire. Michael felt the world spin. Reed, who'd stood by him in major investigations, was directly involved in the massacre. This twist didn't just complicate the case. It confirmed swamp fire wasn't just military, it was tied to the FBI from the inside. Jimmy leaned forward, eyeing Michael warily. You get it now? This isn't just an old case. It's a network. If you keep going, you'll face not just ghosts of the past, but people who were once your allies, and trust me, they won't hesitate to make you disappear like those 23 fishermen. Michael didn't respond. He stared at the SF-3 vial and the tape on the table. His mind churned with pain from betrayal and fear of the horrifying truth unfolding. Outside, the drone's buzzing returned, closer now, hovering near the shack's window. A red dot swept across the wooden wall, as if scanning coordinates. Michael drew his gun, and Jimmy whispered, "They've found us." In the tense moment as the drone buzzed outside the window, Michael lightly gripped his gun, glancing at Jimmy. The old soldier remained strangely calm, like someone used to being hunted for half a lifetime. Jimmy stood, pulling down the rotting wooden shutter, blocking the view from outside. "They'll be back," he said hoarsely. "But before that happens, you need to know everything." Michael looked at the glass vial on the table. The oil lamp's light illuminated the faded label, and this time, under the grime, he read clearly, U.S. AMR-ID. U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. His heart raced. This was no longer a vague clue, but direct evidence of U.S. military involvement. Army Infectious Disease Research, Michael muttered. This was never meant to leave a lab. Jimmy lit another cigarette, exhaling thick smoke. Right, and the Everglades was their outdoor lab. But you know those 23 fishermen weren't the only ones who vanished back then, don't you? Michael looked up, eyes narrowing with suspicion. What do you mean? From 1974 to 1976, at least 9 local hunters and 2 University of Miami biologists also disappeared in the same area. All were officially reported as animal attacks or lost in the swamp. But I know better. They saw something they shouldn't have. And when you see too much, you're eliminated. Jimmy reached under the bed, pulling out a dark, military-stamped metal box. He opened it, revealing a worn leather notebook, reeking of mold. This was the diary of another guard in my unit. He died mysteriously months after the mission. I kept it as proof. Michael flipped through the yellowed pages, the shaky but clear handwriting, detailing shifts, weather, brief orders. Then one line stopped him cold. Night of the 23rd, We pulled 26 body bags ashore. At least 3 were women. I don't understand. There were no women among the fishermen. Who were they? Michael's hands trembled. 3 women, never mentioned in any file. Dear God, he whispered. So besides the 23 fishermen, there were other victims. Jimmy nodded. Exactly. They were never recorded. And you know why? Because they were outsiders, civilian biologists who got too close to the test site. They were tied up with the fishermen to be silenced forever. Michael took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He'd seen classified Cold War files, but never a confession this brutal. Then he noticed a torn section at the diary's end, as if someone had ripped out a critical part. Tracing the jagged edge, he saw faint remaining words. Operation Delta Nest. Delta Nest, Michael repeated, voice tense. Jimmy met his gaze, his aged eyes dark with dread. I never knew exactly what it was, but word was it was Swamp Fire's next phase. If Swamp Fire was the cleanup killing civilians to keep the secret, Delta Nest was the real program. Large-scale biological release. Michael sat frozen. His mind raced with possibilities. Delta Nest could be a plan to test pathogens on populations or even prepare a strategic biological weapon. If true, what happened in the Everglades was just the tip of the iceberg. Outside, the drone went silent, but Michael knew it hadn't left. It was waiting, watching. He looked at the soldier's diary, the USAM vial, the tape, then at Jimmy. If Delta Nest is real, we haven't seen the worst of it. Jimmy nodded slowly, and Reed, he might still hold that piece of the puzzle. In that moment, Michael knew he'd stumbled into a deadly game, where each new clue only opened deeper, more terrifying chasms. Michael drove home in the dark, his mind reeling from Jimmy's revelations. Operation Delta Nest, the name alone chilled him. But that unease was nothing compared to what awaited him at his small Coral Gables suburban home. The front door was ajar, the lock was pried, the wood around the handle splintered. Michael drew his gun, stepping lightly inside, his seasoned agent instincts kicking in. The living room was pitch black, lit only by moonlight through the window. A strange smell hit him. Torn old paper, dust mixed with the faint scent of military boot leather. His filing cabinet was ransacked. The Swamp Fire file he'd hidden at the bottom of a drawer was now scattered across the floor, pages torn, some blurry photos missing. On the dining table, neatly placed like a statement, was a white sheet of paper with bold text. Stop digging, Agent. Michael gripped the paper, veins bulging. They knew who he was. They still called him Agent, a reminder that even retired, he hadn't escaped this deadly game. He checked further. The SF-3 vial was still there, but the reel-to-reel tape was gone. That meant the intruders knew exactly what mattered most. But why leave the vial? A warning, or a trap? Michael knew he couldn't verify this alone. He needed an expert, and only one person he trusted, Alan Mercer, a former FBI colleague, now teaching molecular biology at Georgetown University. Alan had worked on 1980s bioweapons cases, one of the few outside the military with real U.S. AMRID knowledge. Michael secured the vial in a metal box and took a late-night flight to Washington, D.C. He and Alan met in a small, triple-locked basement lab at the research facility. Alan, silver-haired but sharp-eyed, held the vial under fluorescent light, shaking it gently, observing its color, then placing it in a spectrometer. The screen displayed a stream of data. Alan frowned. This isn't anything I've seen in public reports. Michael waited, heart pounding. Alan ran more tests, then whispered, as if the walls had ears. This bacteria, it's close to Bacillus, anthracis, anthrax. But what? Michael pressed. There's evidence of genetic modification. The plasmid structure's been altered to speed up spread and resist antibiotics. Michael, this isn't just for research. This is a weaponized sample. And not crude. It's advanced, beyond 1970s tech. Michael clenched his fists. Everything Jimmy said was true. The Everglades wasn't a random test site. It was the starting point for a larger, more sophisticated program. Swamp Fire and Delta Nest might have been projects to test bioweapons on U.S. soil. Alan continued. I need more time for deeper analysis, but these preliminary results are enough to make any government bury it immediately. If this is an original U.S. Amrid sample, it ties directly to the military. You have to be extremely careful, Michael. Michael nodded. I know. Keep this quiet. If you can, back up the data today. Alan looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. I'll try. But Michael, if they're watching you, they'll definitely watch me. They parted near dawn. Michael returned to his hotel, heavy-hearted but with a flicker of hope. He finally had scientific confirmation, but that hope quickly turned to a nightmare. The next morning, Michael called Alan's office. The secretary said Professor Mercer hadn't shown up for class or left any message. Michael tried his personal cell, busy, then disconnected. By afternoon, local news ran a brief story: Georgetown University professor mysteriously missing. His car was found abandoned in a lot near the Potomac River. Door open, keys still inside. Michael sank into a chair, ice coursing through him. He'd put Alan in their crosshairs, and now his friend was gone. The hotel phone rang. Michael picked up, hearing a voice cold as steel. I told you, Agent. Stop digging. Your friend didn't listen. Will you? Michael didn't answer, slowly hanging up. In his mind, the image of the SF Bertol-3 vial loomed like a deadly curse. Alan had paid the price for touching it, and Michael knew he had no way back. When he checked his suitcase to secure the vial, he found the metal box's seal torn open. Inside, empty. The SF Bertol-3 vial was gone. Someone had entered his room while he was on the phone. This time, they weren't just warning. They'd taken his only evidence. Michael sat motionless in the DC hotel room, staring at the empty metal box. The SF Bertol-3 vial was gone. Alan was missing, and the caller left one message: stop digging. But to Michael, that loss only pushed him deeper. He knew, if he wanted to unravel Swamp Fire, he needed a new approach. And in the photos he'd snapped of the files before the break-in, one detail stood out: family relocation program. The short list noted a few names with temporary addresses. One was the Howard family, once living in the small town of Vineland, New Jersey. Final note: relocated, 1976. Michael decided to start there. Michael drove through the night from DC to Vineland. The town was so peaceful, it was hard to believe it had once been a landing spot for a national conspiracy. The house at 44 Magnolia Street, once home to the Howard family, was now dilapidated, its windows boarded up, the grass overgrown. Michael knocked on the door, but there was no answer. An elderly woman from the house across the street hobbled out, leaning on a cane and eyeing him curiously. Who are you looking for? The Howard family. They used to live here, Michael said, keeping his voice calm. The woman frowned, then nodded slightly. Oh, the Howards. I remember, they only lived here a few years. One night, I think it was 76, some black cars showed up. No plates. They knocked. And the whole family came out with a few suitcases. The kids were crying their eyes out. Then, they were gone. Did you ever see them come back? Nope, just some guys in suits came by a few times to clear out leftover stuff. After that, the house was empty. I asked once, and they said it was government relocation for safety reasons. But, she lowered her voice, I never bought that story. Michael thanked her and turned back to the house, his heart pounding. He knew he'd hit a nerve. Inside the Howard house, thick dust blanketed everything. But when Michael shone his flashlight on the living room wall, he spotted an old frame lying face down on the floor. He picked it up, brushed off the dust. The faded black and white photo showed an outdoor party. The Howard family stood by a picnic table, the father in a white shirt shaking hands with. Michael froze. The man facing him, his face unmistakable. Reed, his former colleague, the man Jimmy swore he saw at the scene in 1975. Now, appearing in a photo of a family that was relocated. This proved Reed wasn't just involved in the execution, but oversaw the cover-up program. Michael tucked the photo into his pocket, his mind reeling. If the Howards and other families were relocated by the government, they might not have died in the Everglades. They could be living under new identities. But with Reed's role, Michael suspected, was it relocation or systematic elimination? He went to the local library, digging through old newspapers from 1975, 1976. One short article, buried on the back page, dated July 15, 1976. Howard family moves for job reasons. Neighbors send well wishes. Just a few lines, no photos, no details. A community notice clearly written under orders. Michael photographed the article, then sat in his car for hours. He knew he was getting too close. Alan had vanished just for touching the bacteria sample. If Reed was still alive, he could be pulling strings from the shadows. That night, Michael checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of Vinland. He used a personal laptop, checking a newly created email account to avoid tracking. When he opened it, he nearly dropped his coffee cup. An anonymous email, no subject, no sender. Just one line. The Everglades still swallows bodies. Attached was an image. Michael clicked it open. The screen showed a chilling scene in the black water of the Everglades. A bloated corpse floated, skin gray, eyes milky white, riddled with bullet holes. Dense foliage surrounded it, clearly a remote channel. No one visited. Michael zoomed in. The corpse's hand still wore a silver ring engraved with J.H., a familiar name from the list of 23 fishermen, John Heller. His body went cold. This corpse wasn't some vague historical evidence. It was brutal reality. After 30 years, bodies were still held by the swamp, and someone had sent this proof straight to him, to warn him, or to lure him. Michael leaned back, heart racing. He realized the game had changed. From this moment, the anonymous sender, friend or foe manipulating him, had placed him face to face with a stark truth. The Everglades never stayed silent, and swamp fire was far from over. The Everglades night was thick as ink, the air heavy with the damp, fishy stench of stagnant water and decay. Michael steered a small borrowed canoe from an old Coast Guard friend, with Jimmy seated behind, a shotgun across his knees. They'd barely spoken since leaving Vinland, where Michael received the chilling email with the bloated corpse photo. They both knew only returning to the Everglades could yield answers. "Where do we start?" Michael asked as his flashlight swept over head-high reeds. Jimmy held out an old map, his bony finger pointing to a red-circled area. "Here. That's where the auxiliary research stations used to be. I haven't been back in over 30 years. If swamp fire really existed, traces are still there." The canoe glided into a narrow channel. The black water shimmered under moonlight. The hum of insects drowned out the motor. The deeper they went, the more Michael felt the Everglades as an endless maze, each turn hiding something horrific. Around midnight they reached a low-lying patch of land. Cracked concrete slabs peeked from under ancient tree roots, like scars of a hidden structure. Michael's flashlight revealed a square foundation, surrounded by rusted iron posts. "This is it," Jimmy whispered. "The swamp fire facility." They stepped in, crunching over broken glass and rubble. In a corner, Michael spotted a corroded metal container, still bearing a faint label, "Biohazard, Usam Reed property." He touched it, and peeling paint flaked off. Nearby, a rusted M16 rifle lay across the debris, its stock nearly rotted away. Jimmy picked up a faded stainless steel sign. Under the flashlight, Michael read 3 etched words, "Swamp Fire Facility." The air was thick, the smell of rust and mold choking. Michael scribbled notes, snapping photos with a Polaroid camera, knowing any moment could be their last chance. "Look," Jimmy pointed to a cracked wall. Behind dense vines, a concrete door emerged, its surface faintly marked with a biohazard symbol. A yellow triangle with 3 black spirals. Michael touched it, noting the rusted but unlocked hinges. Together, they pushed hard. The door creaked open, revealing a short, pitch-black hallway, a foul stench hitting them hard. Inside the room, their flashlights swept across, and both froze. On the cold concrete floor, 7 human skeletons lay scattered, all with hands tied behind their backs with rusted wire. Several skulls were cracked, rib cages pierced with bullet holes. Michael stepped closer, picking up a leather bracelet still clinging to a wrist bone. It was engraved with E.C., he recalled, Edward Collins, one of the 23 missing fishermen. Jimmy knelt by another skeleton, his hand trembling on the skull. They weren't eaten by alligators, Michael. They were executed and locked in here. Michael clenched his fists, his chest burning with rage. For years, authorities claimed these innocent people vanished due to natural accidents. In truth, they were systematically eliminated, like lab animals. Jimmy found a yellowed paper scrap stuck in a crack. He pulled it out, revealing a few legible words. Phase 2 complete. Transfer to Operation Delta Nest. Michael stared at the text, his heart tightening. Once again, Delta Nest surfaced, tied to these deaths. These bodies were just the start of a far crueler program. They photographed the room, gathering what evidence they could. Michael picked up a rusted shell casing, stamped with a military manufacturer's mark. The proof was undeniable. This was no accident, but an organized, deliberate execution. The room's air was stifling, but both knew they had to leave before someone tracked them. Michael slung the camera around his neck, heading for the door. Suddenly, a sound shattered the night's silence. A canoe's engine echoed from the main channel. Then a spotlight beam hit the ruins, momentarily blinding Michael and Jimmy. The canoe roared, water splashing wildly. From the bow, several figures in dark gear stepped down. But the leader wasn't some nameless soldier. As he emerged from the light, Michael froze. "Reed," Michael muttered, his hand instinctively tightening on his pistol. The man before him was no longer the sharp FBI agent Michael knew 30 years ago. Now, Thomas Reed wore a dark suit, his demeanor calm, salt and pepper hair neatly trimmed, a global private security firm's logo pinned to his lapel. He looked more like a powerful CEO than a shadow operative. Reed gave a faint smile, stepping slowly toward Michael. "Been a long time, Mike. I knew you'd find your way back here eventually. You were supposed to die with the truth in 1975, Michael growled. Reed shook his head, his eyes ice cold. "No, Mike, I live to ensure swamp fire never resurfaces. Because you don't understand, swamp fire saved America." Jimmy snarled, stepping forward. "Saved America? By killing 23 fishermen, 9 hunters, 2 biologists, and burying their bodies in the swamp?" Reed glanced at Jimmy, his look dismissive. "They were just unlucky, a small price for victory in the Cold War. You think America stood tall against the Soviets by chance? Swamp fire was the answer." Michael shivered at the words. He knew Reed believed his own twisted logic. Swamp fire was a biological weapons test, conducted on U.S. soil to accelerate research. But to justify dozens of civilian deaths, Reed saw it as the price. Michael stepped forward, voice trembling with anger. "They were Americans. Citizens. You turned this country into a death lab." Reed smirked, gesturing to a subordinate to place a briefcase on the ground. He opened it, pulling out a thin file and a faded color photo, holding it before Michael. "Recognize this?" Michael took it, his eyes freezing. The photo, taken at FBI headquarters in 1974, showed him 34-year-old Agent Harrington, hair still jet black, sitting in a meeting room, signing a stack of documents. Stamped clearly in the corner, "Budget Allocation, Project Swampfire." Michael stood stunned. The world spun. "No way." Reed's smile was that of a man landing a fatal blow. "You signed off on Swampfire's budget, Mike. Your own hand, in 1974. You might have thought it was just one of hundreds of Cold War proposals, but you put pen to paper, and that greenlit the project." Jimmy looked at Michael, eyes wide with shock. You did?" Michael shook his head frantically, hands trembling. I didn't know. I thought it was a defensive bio-research project. No one told me it involved massacring civilians." Reed stepped closer, voice dripping with mockery. "But your signature's there. History doesn't care if you knew. You were part of Swampfire from day one." Michael felt his stomach twist. Memories flooded back. Long days in D.C., a desk piled with files, dozens of classified projects rushed through. He remembered signing stacks of papers under pressure from superiors, and among them, swamp fire. No, he whispered. I unwittingly became an accomplice. Reed stared, his smile venomous. Exactly. You're no different from me, Mike. I accepted the truth while you've been running from it. Jimmy gritted his teeth, jabbing the shotgun's barrel into Reed's chest. He's nothing like you. He's uncovering the truth, not killing to hide it. Reed's men instantly raised their weapons, the tension razor sharp. Reed raised a hand to stop them, his eyes locked on Michael. You know why I'm here, Mike? Not to kill you, to give you a chance. Join me in burying this again. Stay silent. Hide the evidence, and you'll live out your days in peace. Michael gripped the photo, cold sweat dripping down his temple. Now, it wasn't just about justice for the 23 fishermen, it was a battle with his own past. Reed had made him a cog in the conspiracy from the start. If exposed, Michael wouldn't just be the investigator, but a witness implicating himself. Michael slumped onto the cracked concrete, hands clutching his head, breathing raggedly. The photo Reed showed, burned like an indelible bloodstain, proof that 30 years ago, he'd unknowingly opened the door to a deadly program. Jimmy stepped closer, placing a calloused hand on his shoulder. His old voice was low but firm. Mike, listen. Because you signed, because you were involved, you have even more reason to expose it all. Don't let Reed turn your unintended guilt into chains. You owe the 23 fishermen, their families, and yourself. Michael looked up, eyes red. But if this goes public, I'll be seen as complicit. History won't remember me as the investigator, but as the one who greenlit the crime. No, Jimmy shook his head. History will remember you as the only one who dared make it right. Don't let Reed keep writing the story. The words echoed in Michael's mind like a jolt. He took a deep breath, slowly standing. His hand gripped the pistol, no longer trembling. All right, he said softly. We'll gather every scrap of evidence left, and I know someone who can help. Congressman Carlos Torres. Torres was one of the few politicians openly fighting corruption, having investigated shady defense contracts in the 1990s. Michael had met him a few times in Washington and knew Torres had clout, especially with the media. If anyone could bring swamp fire to light, it was him. Michael began collecting what they still had. The soldier's diary mentioning Operation Delta Nest, the photo of Reed shaking hands with the Howard Patriarch, Polaroids of the sealed room with 7 bound skeletons, and scans of 1974 budget files he'd found in the archive before the break-in. In a damp motel room, he opened an encrypted laptop, drafting a brief email to Torres. I have evidence of an illegal biological weapons program in the Everglades. Operation Swamp Fire. I'm ready to meet. If you truly want to expose corruption, contact me. He attached a few teaser photos, the USA Amory D-labeled container, the wall with the biohazard symbol, and a short clip from the old tape. Neutralize all. Swamp fire must remain silent. Within 24 hours, Michael got a direct reply from Torres's office. The congressman's voice came through the phone, urgent but steady. Mr. Harrington, if what you say is true, we'll open a congressional hearing. But I need ironclad evidence, physical samples, living witnesses, original documents. If you deliver, I promise to bring this to light. Michael's chest heaved, feeling hope for the first time in weeks. I have a witness, he said, glancing at Jimmy by the bed, and I have documents. But we need absolute security. Reed won't sit idle, Torres replied curtly. I'll handle that. But watch your every step. If Reed knows you've contacted me, you won't have much time. 2 days later, Michael drove north from Florida, Jimmy in the passenger seat. They carried a suitcase of evidence, their lives' worth. Michael knew every mile could be a trap. He changed routes constantly, never staying anywhere long. That night, as their old sedan crossed a quiet stretch of highway near a canal, Michael glanced in the rearview mirror. A pair of headlights glared 200 meters behind. At first, he thought it was just another car. But after 3 turns, it kept the exact distance, neither passing nor falling back. They're tailing us, Jimmy whispered. Hand resting on the shotgun under his seat, Michael floored it. The car behind matched his speed. His heart pounded. The road was narrow, flanked by black canals, no guardrails. Suddenly, the trailing car roared forward, pulling alongside. Metal screeched as it rammed Michael's sedan. He swerved to stay balanced, tires skidding near the canal's edge. "Hold on!" Michael shouted, yanking the wheel. The sedan wobbled, but the other car kept ramming, its headlights blinding Michael. In a flash, he saw the driver's cold face through the windshield. A man in a black suit, earpiece in place. A second ram sent Michael's car lurching onto the shoulder. The rear tires slid down the canal bank. Water sprayed. Michael fought for control, but the impact was too strong. The sedan screeched, spun, and plunged into the dark canal. Icy water flooded the cabin. Glass shattered. Michael and Jimmy were tossed in the chaos. Michael panicked, grabbed for the suitcase of evidence slipping out the window. He clung to it, lungs burning for air. In that moment, he knew Reed had struck. And if he died tonight, swamp fire would stay buried for another generation. The sedan sank deeper into the black canal, water pouring in like cold hands dragging Michael and Jimmy to the bottom. Michael gritted his teeth, releasing his seat, kicking at the remaining glass. Bubbles roared around his ears. In the panic, he still gripped the metal suitcase, the only evidence that could expose swamp fire. Jimmy surged forward, the shotgun gone, but the old man calm enough to kick at the doorframe. The glass gave way, water rushing in fiercely. They broke free, surfacing in the canal, gasping for air. On the bank, the spotlight still shone, but the mystery car was gone, leaving churned mud behind. Michael clutched the reeds, pulling the suitcase up first, then both crawled ashore. They lay panting, chests heaving, the smell of mud and engine oil mingling, but alive. "They know our every move," Michael rasped. "If we want more evidence, we have to stay one step ahead." Jimmy nodded, wiping mud from his face. "I know a place, an abandoned military depot on the edge of Miami. In the 70s, they stored swamp fire's documents and equipment there. If we're lucky, something's left." 2 days later, they reached the old depot, hidden among mangroves and overgrown grass. Gray concrete walls peeled, the rusted gate locked with a broken chain. A faded sign atop read, "Federal Storage, Restricted." Michael and Jimmy slipped through a collapsed wall, stepping inside. The air reeked of old metal and rotting paper. Flashlights swept over rusted shelves, littered with empty ammo crates and scattered file boxes. They navigated to a deeper room, its steel door ajar. Inside, both froze. Stacks of thick files, covered in dust but unburned, remained intact. Michael, trembling, pulled a red-labeled file, "Swamp Fire, Biological Transmission Trials." He opened it, heart racing. Detailed test reports lay within. March 12, 1974. Released SF Mither 3, strain into American alligator population. Infection rate, 73%. Mortality rate, 41%. Symptoms, skin lesions, blindness, heightened aggression. Next page, June 27, 1974. Injected SF Pictable 3 into migratory bird flock. Within 48 hours, population dispersed pathogen across a 60-mile radius. Result, effective spread, hard to control. Final page, September 19, 1974. Tested on native wild boars, high mortality, but clear risk of human transmission. Recommend halting public tests, shift to classified phase. Michael swallowed hard, gripping the file. This was clear proof that swamp fire didn't just test on the environment, but used the Everglades ecosystem as a breeding ground for genetically modified bacteria. Jimmy kept searching, pulling out a long, stamped classified list. Title, Operation Swamp Fire Sites, 1973. Below were 6 southern states with precise coordinates: Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas. "Good God," Jimmy whispered. "Not just the Everglades. A whole network of test sites." Michael photographed it all. If this list reached Congress, it would be a ticking bomb. In a corner, he found another file, labeled Personnel Reports. Inside were profiles of Swamp Fire's scientists. On the third line, Michael choked. Dr. William Keene, killed in plane crash near Atlanta, 5/1974. Eleanor Price, died in civilian plane crash same year, official cause engine failure. But in the margin, a penciled scrawl, both opposed expanding Swamp Fire to Delta Nest phase. Michael and Jimmy locked eyes, stunned. They didn't die in accidents, Michael said, voice low. They were eliminated. Jimmy sighed, gripping Michael's shoulder. The ones with a conscience always die first. Michael stuffed the file into the suitcase, feeling both heavy and resolute. Now he had everything. Test reports, the 6-state list, and proof 2 dissenting scientists died mysteriously. As they prepared to leave, Jimmy heard a metallic clank in the distance. He signaled Michael to kill the flashlight. From outside, heavy footsteps echoed, like military boots on concrete. Michael held his breath, hand on his gun's trigger. A distant flashlight beam swept the hallway, a voice crackling over a radio. Confirmed signs of intrusion. Check the entire old depot. Michael and Jimmy exchanged a glance. Time was running out. As they bolted for the rear exit, Michael accidentally dropped a photo. The stranger's flashlight hit it, the image of the sealed room with 7 bound skeletons. The radio barked urgently. They've found evidence. Lock down the area. No one gets out. The metal suitcase weighed heavily in Michael's grip as he and Jimmy sprinted through the rear exit of the abandoned depot. Footsteps pounded behind, flashlight beams slashing through the dark. They ran through the reeds, hearts racing, then scrambled into the old pickup Michael had hidden on the dirt road's edge. Get in, Michael yelled, turning the key, the engine roaring to life. Jimmy, panting and drenched in sweat, climbed into the passenger seat, clutching the rusted shotgun found in the depot. Behind them, shouts mixed with military radio chatter echoed. Don't let them escape. North, north. Michael floored it, the truck lurching forward on the narrow dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust. His plan was clear: deliver the documents to a newsroom in downtown Miami. The justice system couldn't be trusted with Reed in control, and electronic channels were monitored. The press was their only shot. The whole drive, Jimmy stayed silent, his sunken eyes staring through the windshield. The smell of sweat, gunpowder, and old paper filled the cabin. Michael glanced over. When these documents go public, they won't be able to hide anymore. Torres will have the leverage to launch a congressional hearing. Jimmy nodded slightly, his aged hand brushing the cover of the soldier's diary they'd taken. But his eyes betrayed deep unease. Mike, we're poking a hornet's nest. Reed won't let the press touch this. Michael gripped the wheel tighter. Let him try. About 40 miles from Miami, the highway grew eerily empty. No cars ahead, none behind. Michael's neck hairs stood up. He checked the rearview mirror. Nothing. Suddenly, 2 black SUVs roared out from both sides of the road, boxing in Michael's truck. One from the left, one from the right, moving in sync like a rehearsed drill. Hold on, Michael shouted, swerving to avoid them, but the right SUV slammed hard into the truck's side. The screech of metal echoed. The truck shook violently. Jimmy braced himself, but his head smacked the side window. Blood trickled down his forehead. Michael tried to break free by slowing down, but a third SUV appeared behind, ramming the rear. The truck spun out of control, rolling 3 times before crashing nose first into a roadside ditch. Glass shattered, metal crumpled, then a suffocating silence. Michael, dazed but conscious, ached all over. He turned to Jimmy, slumped in the passenger seat, blood soaking his shirt, breathing heavily. Jimmy, hang on. Michael shook him. The old man opened his eyes, lips trembling. I'm okay. Go, Mike. Don't let the evidence go. The truck's door was ripped open. A man in black, face masked, lunged for the suitcase in Michael's hands. Michael fought back, his pistol flashing out, firing. The shot rang out, the bullet tearing through the man's shoulder. He staggered back, hissing in pain. But other dark figures rushed forward, guns raised. Michael knew he couldn't hold them all off. They yanked the suitcase from his hands, searched it quickly, then leapt into a waiting SUV. In an instant, the dust swallowed them, leaving Michael slumped by the roadside, chest heaving. He looked back. The suitcase was gone. Frantic, Michael rummaged through the wreckage of the overturned truck. By luck, in the sweat-soaked pocket of his jacket, he found a small reel of tape and a folded, worn letter. In the chaos, the attackers hadn't noticed them. Trembling, he opened the letter. The scrawled but clear handwriting was signed, Dr. Eleanor Price, one of the 2 scientists killed in plane crashes in 1974. The message was brief but chilling. Swamp fire isn't the end game. It's just the prelude. What they really plan to deploy is code-named Nightshade. If anyone finds this letter, know that what happened in the Everglades was only the beginning. Michael read it again, his heart gripped as if by a vice. Nightshade? A program even more brutal than swamp fire. He tucked the letter and tape into his pocket, glancing at Jimmy. The former soldier was barely clinging to life, blood soaking the seat. Michael shouted for an ambulance through a hidden satellite phone. But deep down, he knew this was no longer just about 23 fishermen or a few test sites. Swamp fire was a cover. Nightshade was the real monster waiting to be faced. The ambulance siren wailed faintly in the distance, a fragile thread of hope. Michael knelt beside Jimmy, whose bloodied hand trembled, grasping Michael's wrist. His eyes, once sharp from countless battles, were now cloudy, but still fierce. "Don't waste time on me, Mike," Jimmy gasped, voice hoarse. "I've gone far enough. The rest is yours." Michael shook his head, pressing his hand against the wound in Jimmy's stomach, blood seeping relentlessly. "No, you'll live. I'll get you to a hospital. You'll testify, Jimmy." The old man shook his head, a weary smile on his lips. "Testify means nothing. They'll kill me in the hospital bed. But you can get the truth out." From his tattered jacket, Jimmy pulled out a thick, worn leather notebook, reeking of mold. He shoved it into Michael's hands. "This my diary. 30 years I wrote it all. Orders, maps, names. I kept it, knowing this day would come." Michael flipped it open, eyes scanning pages dense with text. The clumsy but chillingly detailed writing included maps of the swamp fire base, guard posts, chemical storage areas, a list of commanding officers with ranks, military IDs, dates, and in the middle of a page, a scrawled, capitalized order. "Shoot to kill. No survivors." Michael gripped the diary, his chest burning like embers. This was undeniable proof. They ordered murder, not an accident or failed experiment. Jimmy struggled for breath, his voice fading. "There's a photo at the back. It'll show you who was behind it all." Michael turned to the final page. Tucked between sheets was a blurry photo, still clear enough. Taken in 1975 at an Everglades waterway, it showed Reed standing with arms crossed beside a man in a gray suit, hair slicked back, an American flag pin on his lapel. Michael squinted, his heart stopping. "My God, that's Senator Harold Whitmore." Jimmy nodded faintly. Whitmore, Defense Committee back then. He was there to watch swamp fire operate. Not just the military, not just the FBI. Congress had hands in it too. Michael's hands shook as he held the photo. Whitmore was no stranger. He'd been a key architect of 1970s defense budgets, hailed as a guardian of American security. If he was at the Everglades the night the 23 fishermen vanished, swamp fire wasn't a rogue project. It was backed at the highest levels. "You have to keep going, Mike." Jimmy squeezed Michael's hand one last time. "Don't let them rewrite the story. Don't let my name and those who died be erased." His eyes blurred. His breathing faltered. Then his calloused hand fell limp. Jimmy Calhoun, the soldier who once guarded swamp fire's gates, took his final breath on the dark roadside, leaving Michael with a diary heavier than any bullet. Michael bowed his head for a moment, the weight of the sky pressing down. But as the ambulance lights flickered through the trees, he snapped to. He knew, if anyone touched Jimmy's body or the diary, everything would vanish again. He hid the diary in his inner pocket, clutched the photo of Reed and Whitmore, and slipped into the darkness before the medics arrived. Michael drove a different car, commandeered from an abandoned lot, toward Miami. Jimmy's words echoed. Swamp fire wasn't just the military, it had Congress's hands. He flicked on a flashlight, scanning the diary's pages. Details choked him. Reports of neutralizing civilian witnesses, listing body counts buried in specific pits, logs of chemical shipments from Fort Detrick to Florida, and crucially one entry, July 2, 1975. Reed, directly commanded, Whitmore present, observed for 2 hours. After clear, he left by military helicopter. Order reiterated, no survivors. Michael closed his eyes, the world spinning. The faces of the 23 fishermen surfaced, their screams Jimmy recounted, now forming a single picture. Reed was the executioner, but Whitmore was the shadow of power behind him. On the highway into the city, Michael turned on the radio to check the news. A broadcast broke through. Senator Harold Whitmore will attend a defense-honoring ceremony in Miami this week, joined by top leaders. Michael gave a bitter laugh. The irony, while they hailed him as a hero, the diary in his pocket could brand Whitmore a traitor. But he also knew, the closer he got to Miami, the greater the danger. Reed surely had men ready to stop him. And now, Michael was alone. In the dark, he pulled over, opening the diary again. The flashlight lit the blurry photo, Reed beside Whitmore, both staring coldly at the camera. Michael whispered, voice choked. "If I go down, this photo will drag you all to hell." Then he started the car, speeding toward the city lights, carrying Jimmy's blood-stained diary and his final charge. The old sedan screeched as Michael pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a gray concrete building in downtown Miami. The smell of gas, smoke, and rusted metal reminded him of the abandoned depot days ago. But this time, his jacket held more than old files. He had Jimmy's blood-soaked diary, the photo of Reed with Senator Whitmore, and an unshakable resolve. Upstairs, Congressman Carlos Torres waited. Torres, short, with a rugged face and unflinching eyes, had angered many with his anti-corruption probes. Beside him were 3 Miami Herald investigative reporters: Linda Shaw, a veteran editor, Marco Alvarez, a war zone photographer, and Claire Donnelly, a young writer who'd exposed a major oil conglomerate the previous year. Torres shook Michael's hand firmly. "I've heard of you for years, Agent Harrington. But seeing what you've brought, I know we're facing a political earthquake." Michael placed the diary on the table, flipping through pages, base schematics, officer lists, the shoot-to-kill order, and the photo of Whitmore with Reed. Linda Shaw inhaled sharply, face paling. "If we publish this, it'll shake Congress to its core." Marco Alvarez snapped photos of each page with a digital camera. Claire muttered, as if to herself, "Swamp fire isn't just a cover-up, it's a war crime on American soil." Torres nodded, eyes stern. "Here's the plan. I'll call for an emergency hearing with the House Oversight Committee. Linda's team will publish simultaneously in print and online, ensuring it can't be blocked. And you, Michael, will be the key witness with the evidence." Michael paused, then nodded. He'd lived a life in the Cold War's shadows, but never felt a burden this heavy. 2 days later, the government struck back. National news aired a sudden report. Former FBI agent Michael Harrington has spread baseless claims about 1970s defense projects. Government sources say Harrington suffers from age-related paranoia and has forged documents. The Justice Department vows to investigate this misinformation. Michael sat in the newsroom, eyes glued to the TV. An old photo of him, injured from a 1989 case, was used as proof of his mental instability. They called him a delusional old man chasing past glory. Claire Donnelly slammed her hand on the table. "They're smearing you. It's the same dirty tactic I've written about." Torres narrowed his eyes, voice cold. "This proves we've hit a nerve. They've got no choice but to discredit you. But Michael, you have to stay strong. If you waver, they win." Michael gripped the diary. "I don't care what they call me. I only care about justice for the 23 fishermen and all who died." The plan was set. The hearing was scheduled in Washington the following week. Torres would summon witnesses, Michael and 2 scientists who'd worked on swamp fire but later withdrew. One was Dr. Samuel Hartman, living quietly outside Miami, once with U.S. Army. Hartman had agreed to testify despite the risks. Linda's team prepared a bombshell report to drop on the hearing day, with photos, diary excerpts, and Michael's testimony. Marco meticulously copied all files onto separate drives, stashed securely. Torres scanned the table, eyes resolute. Once this goes public, they can't stop it. But until then, every one of us will be watched, threatened, maybe attacked. Prepare for the worst. Michael recalled Reed's appearances, the ambushes, Alan Mercer's death, Jimmy's death. He knew what the worst meant. But the fire in him wouldn't die. The night before meeting Hartman, Michael drove with Claire to a quiet suburb south of Miami, where the scientist lived in seclusion. His house was small, with a tiled roof and a weed-choked yard. Claire held a recorder, eager. This will be the final piece. If Hartman confirms, we'll have a living scientific witness, not just papers. Michael nodded, but kept his hand on the pistol tucked in his jacket. He was too familiar with traps. They parked at the gate. The house was silent, lights off. Michael stepped out, unease creeping in. As he raised his hand to knock, Claire screamed, "Mike, look!" On the porch, the car's headlights revealed a chilling sight. Dr. Samuel Hartman lay face down, blood pooling red, body motionless. Michael rushed over, turning him. Hartman's eyes stared blankly, a bullet hole in his forehead. The killing was less than an hour old. Claire trembled, hand over her mouth. They killed him, right before we could get him to testify. Michael clenched his fists, the weight of the sky on his shoulders. Jimmy's diary burned in his pocket. He knew Reed and those behind him were done warning. They'd eliminate anyone who spoke. He looked up into the thick darkness around the house, certain someone watched from afar. He whispered, both a vow and a warning. You can kill witnesses, but you can't kill the truth. The press room at the independent South Florida Free Network was packed. Cameras lined the sides, reporters jostled, the air thick with tension. Michael sat at the center table, face gaunt, shirt rumpled. Before him was an old recorder with Jimmy Calhoun's tape. Linda Shaw and Claire Donnelly sat beside him, eyes fixed on him. Michael took a deep breath, staring into the live broadcast cameras. His voice was hoarse but steady. For 30 years, 23 fishermen from Homestead vanished, and we were told alligators or the Everglades took them. Today, I present evidence they were executed. He played the tape. A crackling sound filled the room. Then chaos erupted. Boats colliding, people screaming, machine guns firing relentlessly, and a clear voice over the radio. Neutralize all swamp fire must remain silent. The room fell deathly silent, only the tape's sounds remaining. Many reporters sat stunned, some covering their mouths. When the tape stopped, Michael looked into the camera. This wasn't an accident. This was a government-covered crime, and I'll prove it. The U.S. erupted after the announcement. Mainstream media scrambled, former FBI agent releases, shocking tape on 1975 disappearance. Social media flooded with #swampfire, #23 fishermen. One side believed Michael. Thousands of angry comments demanded a federal investigation, reparations for victims' families. Others mocked it as a senile conspiracy, an old man's delusion. YouTube filled with audio analyses, some confirming authenticity, others claiming it was staged. Claire stared at her laptop, muttering, "The public's divided, but at least they can't ignore it now." Linda nodded. "The problem is, they'll hit back." Sure enough, within 24 hours, Reed appeared at a Washington press conference. Impeccably suited, glasses on, he stepped to the podium like a model official. His voice was calm, broadcast nationwide. "The tape Mr. Harrington released is a deep fake, a sophisticated fabrication meant to sow unrest. Modern technology can make anything sound real. I urge Americans to trust what history has recorded. The 1975 disappearance was a swamp accident, no conspiracy." A reporter asked, "But Mr. Reed, why would Harrington risk his reputation for this tape?" Reed shrugged, a cold smile. He's a lonely old man, desperate to be remembered. That's all. The newsroom TV at the Miami Herald went black. Michael slammed his fist on the table, veins bulging. He's turning me into a joke. Torres remained calm. He's chosen denial, but that gives us an opening. If we have visual proof, something undeniable, he'll collapse. Michael gave a bitter laugh. Visual proof? All the photos from back then were seized, destroyed. That night, alone in his motel, Michael's encrypted email pinged with a new message. Anonymous sender, no address, just one line. Want the truth? Check the package at the old freight station, Miami River, locker 47. Michael hesitated. It could be a trap, but his instincts, honed from years of cases, urged him to go. He reached the abandoned freight station near midnight. Wind whistled through rusted train cars. Locker 47 sat in a long row. Its lock old and rusted but unlocked. Inside was an oilcloth-wrapped package. Michael opened it, heart tightening. A black, portable hard drive, no label. Back at the motel, he plugged it into his laptop. A single folder appeared, 1975. Everglades. He opened it. A video played, blurry, but clearly, digitized, 16mm film. The shaky footage showed the Everglades in 1975. Wooden boats filled with fishermen. Then armed soldiers appeared, wearing gas masks, machine guns aimed. Gunfire erupted, screams echoed, blood splashed in the water. The camera panned quickly, capturing men shot and falling into the channel. The water red under moonlight. Michael sat frozen, hands trembling. He rewound slowly. In one frame, Reed appeared, 30 years younger, unmistakable. He stood on the bank, signaling the soldiers to fire. Michael slumped over the desk, shaking. This wasn't just evidence. It was a death sentence for Reed and those who covered it up. He called Torres immediately. The congressman listened, voice choked. If this video goes public, no one can call it a deep fake. This will be the biggest political bombshell since Watergate. Michael tucked the hard drive into his inner pocket, both terrified and resolute. He knew one slip, and he'd die like Alan, Jimmy, Hartman. But if he held on, the truth couldn't be buried. The Capitol building glowed under Washington's sun. Hundreds of reporters crowded the entrance, cameras in rows. The Special House Oversight Committee hearing drew unprecedented attention. Investigation into the 1975 disappearance of 23 fishermen in Operation Swampfire. Headlines on CNN, NBC, Fox blared, video evidence to be revealed. Michael Harrington climbed the steps, dark suit, face haggard, but eyes blazing. In his inner pocket were the 1975 video hard drive, Jimmy Calhoun's blood-stained diary, and the tattered letter from the assassinated scientist. Beside him was Congressman Torres, face stern, and Claire Donnelly, the independent reporter who'd risked everything to break the story. In the hearing room, congressmen filled the seats. Michael raised his hand to swear in. Cameras, broadcast live to millions. The air was thick. Torres began, "Mr. Harrington, please explain why you believe the 23 fishermen didn't die by accident, but were victims of a covert operation." Michael opened his laptop, projecting the video onto a large screen. The shaky footage played, the Everglades, 1975, fishermen on boats, then armed soldiers in gas masks, firing relentlessly. Screams, blood staining the water. The room held its breath. Michael paused on a clear frame. Reed, 30 years younger on the bank, signaling to shoot. Murmurs erupted. Some congressmen covered their mouths. Others leaned back in shock. Michael turned, voice low but firm. "This isn't a deep fake. This is 16mm film, shot by an anonymous witness, digitized and preserved for 3 decades. And the man in that frame is Thomas Reed." Reed sat across the room, in a crisp black suit, eyes like steel. He stood, stepping to the microphone. "This is slander. The video could be fabricated. I was never in the Everglades in 1975. Michael opened Jimmy's diary, its yellowed pages, and scrawled handwriting from a soldier. He read aloud, June 12, 1975. Gunfire, echoed from Channel 7. I saw Reed, civilian commander, order shoot to kill. Fishermen were executed. Bodies sank in black water. I write this so if I die, the truth doesn't die with me. The room exploded. Congressmen pounded tables, demanding order. Michael handed the diary to staff for handwriting, ink, and age verification. Tories stared at Reed. Mr. Reed, how do you explain your name in Calhoun's diary, alongside your image in the video? Reed smiled coldly, deflecting. The diary could be forged. The image, anyone can be impersonated. Another congressman slammed his hand down, but there was no AI deepfake tech in 1975. Outside, viewers watched live, social media erupting. Reed flooded Twitter. Angry comments demanded arrests. In the room, Michael continued. I have more evidence. This is the SF-Ponte-3 biological sample Jimmy kept. Preliminary tests confirm it contains a genetically modified anthrax-like bacterium marked with US AMRI. The government tested biological weapons in the heart of the Everglades and killed civilians to cover it up. Another wave of murmurs swept the room. A female congresswoman whispered, "My God, if this is true, it's a scandal worse than Watergate." Reed's face shifted, and he pulled out a file. If we're talking truth, let's look at this. He held up an image of Michael signing a 1974 supplementary budget, clearly marked, Project Swampfire, approved. The room erupted in chaos. Michael froze, eyes wide. It was his signature. Reed's voice dripped with malice. He's involved too. He's just trying to shift blame to clear himself. Michael gripped the microphone, voice booming. I signed it without knowing it was a project to murder civilians. I thought it was environmental research for national security. The documents were falsified and hidden. The difference is, I'm here exposing it, while you cover it up. The debate raged for over an hour. Congress members demanded a facial recognition match between the video figure and 1975 FBI personnel records. The results flashed on the screen, a 97% match between the man in the video and Thomas Reed. Murmurs erupted again, heavier this time, undeniable. Cliffhanger. As Reed stammered in rebuttal, the hearing room doors swung open. 5 FBI agents entered, uniforms crisp. The leader presented an arrest warrant. Thomas Reed, you are under arrest for mass murder, treason, and concealing federal crimes related to Operation Swampfire. The room reeled. Cameras zoomed in on Reed's ashen face as he was handcuffed at the witness table. Michael watched silently, heart pounding. He knew this was just the beginning, because nightshade, a darker shadow, still loomed. The morning after the hearing, America exploded. National TV ran red banners. Private security official Thomas Reed arrested for mass murder. Newspapers, online outlets, radio, podcasts, all converged on one point: Swampfire. The New York Times led with a bold headline, "Truth buried in the swamp. 23 fishermen didn't vanish. They were executed." The Washington Post called it the darkest turning point in America's secret programs since MKUltra. CNN replayed Michael's congressional video, freezing on Reed signaling the shooting. Twitter and Facebook flooded with memes, outrage, and hashtags #Swampfire Truth, #23 Fishermen, #Justice for Everglades, topping global trends. The FBI launched a massive excavation in the Everglades. Over 100 forensic experts, divers, and agents spread across the dark channels, under international media scrutiny. Helicopters circled above, boats churned the water, turning the quiet swamp into a bustling worksite. On the first day, they found a cracked concrete slab under the mud, exactly where Michael and Jimmy had pointed. Industrial drills pounded down, dust rising thickly. When the slab collapsed, a stench of decay hit, forcing some workers to remove masks and vomit. Beneath lay white bones mixed with rusted metal. A forensic expert broke down, picking up a skull with a clean bullet hole. Within 48 hours, the team unearthed 23 intact skeletons, laid in rows on dry grass, covered with tarps. Each bore signs of bound hands, many skulls pierced by bullets. Reporters photographed publishing undeniable proof. But what chilled most was finding additional bone fragments in other pits, not belonging to the 23 fishermen. Scientists tentatively identified at least 17 more victims, likely the hunters and biologist Jimmy mentioned. Public outrage erupted. Spontaneous vigils sprang up across Florida. Victims' families, many now elderly, wailed before TV screens, seeing their loved ones' bones pulled from the mud after nearly half a century. An 82-year-old woman, daughter of one fisherman, spoke through tears. "For years, I believed my father was eaten by alligators. Turns out he was shot dead by this country." Opposition congressmen roared for a special committee, demanding a full investigation. The press dubbed it the Everglades massacre. Michael sat in a small D.C. hotel room, eyes glued to live news. He felt no victory, only a heavy weight. The image of 23 tarp-covered skeletons reminded him of Jimmy, who died to get him here. His phone rang. It was Torres. "Michael, sit down for this. We just received living witnesses." Michael froze. "Living? What do you mean?" Torres whispered, voice trembling. 3 of the 23 fishermen from that night didn't die. They were forced to change identities, sent to Alaska for 40 years. And now, they're back. The next day, at a secure FBI site, Michael met them. 3 elderly men, gray-haired faces weathered, eyes haunted. The spokesman, Elias Monroe, 72, shook Michael's hand shakily. "I'm one of the 23. I've been silent too long." Their story stunned. That night, some fishermen were separated, forced by Reed and armed soldiers to sign relocation papers for their lives. Flown to Alaska by military plane, given new IDs, they were tightly monitored. Anyone who spoke would disappear. 2 in their group died in mysterious accidents. Only 3 survived to now. Monroe pulled an old 1976 ID from his pocket, a different name but his face. "This is proof. We're living victims, and we're ready to testify." When news of the surviving fishermen broke, America shook again. Networks aired images of the 3 frail men entering an FBI building under heavy guard. Headlines blared, "Living witnesses in swampfire case." The public erupted anew. Not just bones, now there were flesh and blood testimonies. New hashtags trended. "They survived." "Everglades witnesses." Reed, still detained, claimed through his lawyer it was baseless. But the video, diary, bones, and now living witnesses piled against him like a mountain. Michael was invited to meet the fisherman privately. Elias gripped his hand tightly. "Mr. Harrington, Jimmy Calhoun was right. We saw Reed, heard the order to shoot. I lived in fear for 40 years just to speak the truth today. Don't let them bury it again." Michael choked up. He felt the weight of history on his shoulders, but for the first time, real hope. The truth had living voices. Cliffhanger. As Michael left the interrogation room, an FBI agent slipped him a sealed envelope, whispering, "This is just declassified. It's about a follow-up project called Nightshade." Michael gripped the envelope, sensing the darkness wasn't over, and what he'd exposed was only the tip of the iceberg. Congress had no way back. After the FBI revealed the excavation results, 23 bound skeletons, bullet-pierced skulls, and the survivors' testimonies, the Oversight Committee issued a statement. Operation Swampfire existed and violated human rights, international law, and the U.S. Constitution. The news spread globally. NATO allies were stunned. A British MP said on BBC, "If America killed civilians to cover up bioweapons, who's to say they didn't do it abroad?" At the UN, delegates pointed at Washington, demanding an international probe. In the following days, emergency trials began. Thomas Reed faced charges of mass murder, treason, and evidence concealment. Others were exposed. A 1975 U.S. Amrid branch director, 2 military police officers who signed execution orders, and a former White House security advisor. But when the list was read in Congress, Michael froze. Major names were missing. The top-tier players, ministers, generals, defense advisors, escaped, shielded by the familiar phrase, "exempt for national security reasons." Michael slammed his fist on the table, raging at Torres. They killed civilians, buried the truth alive, and now hide behind national security. Torres sighed, voice low. Politics isn't a clean battlefield, Michael. But trust me, Congress admitting swamp fire's existence is an unprecedented earthquake. In Florida, a solemn atmosphere enveloped the Everglades. A national memorial ceremony was held at the former execution site. Flags flew at half-mast across agencies. A black stone monument rose, engraved with the names of 23 fishermen, 9 hunters, 2 biologists, and unidentified victims from scattered bones. Locals flocked, bringing flowers, candles, old photos. Families wept, embracing in the swamp's mud. Michael stood at the crowd's edge, hands trembling as he saw the 3 surviving witnesses kneel before the monument, touching the inscription. They were silenced, but not forgotten. A former fisherman whispered to him, "Thanks to you, we can grieve openly, no longer pretending they died by alligators." Michael gripped the old man's hand, torn between pain and relief. Jimmy Calhoun, if alive, would have smiled, yet the darkness lingered. That night, after the memorial, Michael returned to his Miami hotel room. On the table sat a brown envelope, no sender's address. His heart tightened, a familiar sign of shadowy forces. He opened it slowly. Inside wasn't a threat but an old map, marked in red ink. Operation Nightshade, Louisiana, 1968. Michael inhaled sharply, eyes widening. The scrawled lines pointed to another swamp, far west in Louisiana's bayou. A final note was scribbled in the corner. Swamp fire was just the prelude. Nightshade is the real nightmare. He sat in the dark, listening to the ceiling fan's steady hum. The Everglades had just revealed a 50-year truth. But now a larger secret stirred from Louisiana. Michael clutched the map, knowing he couldn't rest. Swamp fire was exposed, but Nightshade was the true monster. 6 months after Thomas Reed was handcuffed and led from the congressional hearing, the Everglades transformed. Once a chilling swamp hiding secret bones, it became both an investigation site and a memorial shrine. White forensic tents lined the channels, but alongside came pilgrims, reporters, historians, and above all, victims' families, finally able to mourn, lay flowers, light candles. The new memorial, built of polished black granite, bore the names of every fisherman, hunter, biologist, and unidentified victim. A wall behind it read, "They were silenced, but their memory lives forever." In the afternoon sun, the names glinted, as if the 23 fishermen and countless others were finally seen. Over those months, public fury didn't wane. Papers called swamp fire the Everglades Massacre, publishing new investigations. Congress was forced to act, passing the Swamp Fire Transparency Act with overwhelming support. The law mandated all military bioresearch projects must be overseen by Congress, all bioexperiment reports must be declassified after 25 years, and any program involving civilians was banned outright. The act also established a multi-billion-dollar compensation fund for victims' families and created a scientific witness protection program, the first public acknowledgement that people were silenced to guard state secrets. Michael Harrington, 65, who thought his life ended in retirement, became central to one of America's biggest scandals. But he didn't bask in glory, he carried the weight of loss. Jimmy Calhoun, the key witness, didn't survive. Old wounds and years of trauma led to his quiet death in a veterans' hospital. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, attended by hundreds. The American flag draped his coffin, and for the first time, his name rang out as a hero, not a deserter or madman as the government once claimed. Michael stood before Jimmy's portrait, delivering a trembling eulogy. Jimmy carried a horrific secret for half a century. He could have stayed silent for a peaceful life, but he chose to speak and paid with his life. Truth never wins on its own. It needs people willing to sacrifice. Today, we honor such a man. His voice broke. Below, the crowd stood, clapping long and loud, drowning out the afternoon breeze. As summer passed, the Everglades opened its memorial. Thousands visited, laying wreaths along the channel, where the 23 skeletons were found. Schools brought students a living lesson on ethics, science, and abuse of power. Michael returned often, standing on a wooden path over the black water, watching white egrets rise from the reeds, thinking of the souls shot and sunk here. He wondered if justice was truly served when top culprits hid behind national security. But one thing he knew, the truth was no longer buried. Torres, now hailed as a pioneering anti-corruption congressman, called him, "Michael, we did it. But you and I know swamp fire is just one piece." Michael didn't reply immediately. His eyes traced the vast swamp, its water reflecting a fiery sunset. He knew Torres was right. One late autumn evening, after the memorial, Michael sat alone. The crowd had dispersed, leaving only insect hums and lapping waves. He recalled the anonymous envelope from 6 months ago, the Louisiana map marked Operation Nightshade, 1968. He'd kept it secret, not even showing Torres. He knew opening it would drag him into another vortex, but deep down, he understood the darkness wasn't over. As he headed to the parking lot, a figure emerged from the thin fog. A woman, about 40, gaunt. With deep-set eyes, she approached, voice trembling but firm. "Are you Michael Harrington?" Michael nodded, hand instinctively near his pocket, where his old pistol rested. "Who are you?" She pulled out a tattered file, tied with cloth. "I'm the daughter of one of the 23 fishermen. My father never came back, and for 40 years I was taught to stay silent, but I can't anymore." She handed him the file. Michael opened it, finding yellowed pages, military stamped documents, blurry night photos. The first page bore a line in blue ink, "Nightshade, Bayou, Louisiana, classified 1968. Michael looked up, heart racing. The woman stared into his eyes, whispering, "Swamp fire was just the start. If you truly want justice, you have to keep going. Nightshade is far worse." He stood silent in the dark, the swamp's whispers like unrested souls. In his hands, the file trembled with his heartbeat, like a new flame ignited in the long night. Michael knew this journey wasn't over. He'd sacrificed friends, blood, and his later years to expose swamp fire. But now, another door opened, leading to a deeper darkness, where the secret called Nightshade waited to be unveiled. He turned back to the candlelit memorial, hearing Jimmy Calhoun's whisper, "Truth always wins, but only if someone pays the price." Michael gripped the file, stepping into the night. The story of Operation Swamp Fire in the Everglades, with 23 fishermen executed to hide a bioweapons program, is not just a dramatic tale, but a reflection of real fears in American society today. Government transparency, public trust, and the power of individual voices. In the story, Michael Harrington, a retired FBI agent, dared to confront a system of power to expose the truth, at the cost of losing friends, witnessing allies like Jimmy Calhoun die, and living in danger. Details like Congress passing the Swamp Fire Transparency Act, or the solemn memorial for victims, show that only when truth is revealed can society begin to heal. The lesson is clear: even in a democracy, power and national security can be abused to conceal crimes. But the persistence of citizens, media oversight, and the courage of individuals like Michael prevent the darkness from lingering. In today's America, as people face misinformation, political polarization, and government secrets shielded by security excuses, this story reminds us that civic duty goes beyond voting. It's about questioning and demanding transparency. If Michael hadn't dug deeper, if Jimmy hadn't kept the SF-3 vial or diary, 23 families would still live in lies. The practical lesson: maintain healthy skepticism, speak out against injustice, and believe in the power of truth. As Michael's eulogy for Jimmy stated, truth always wins, but it needs those willing to sacrifice. This is a reminder to every American that justice doesn't come from silence, but from the courage to defend what's right. Thank you for joining me on this journey to uncover the truth about swamp fire and hear its costly lessons from the past. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue exploring other secrets still hidden in the shadows.